Morning, everybody, and it's good to see all of you. And it is Friday, but we always save the best for last. So it's good that we're going to be talking about universal meals and inadequate food supply for Vermonters. And it's going to be a very, I think, interesting meeting. It's February 12th and a little after 9. And the committee, I think we all know each other, so we don't need to introduce ourselves. We have Jim DeMars from the Ed Legislative Council that does drafting for education and worked primarily on this bill, and Michael O'Grady, who's our Ag Legislative Council person, and of course Linda, that keeps us all on track most of the time. Has an awful time with me, but the rest of you she does a pretty good job with. Jim, why don't we get started, and you can kind of work through the bill that you crafted, and then we'll have questions, answers, maybe questions as we go through the different sections.
Sounds good. So good morning, everyone. So first, can you hear me? My sound goes in and out sometimes. So am I clear? Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
we can hear you. Okay.
So Linda, if you could make me co-host so I could share this document. Okay, thank you. And I'm looking for
it hasn't come up, Jim.
Yep, it's coming up now. Should be.
Okay. There we go.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go over to the screen. So I'm staring at you guys. And minimize that. Okay. So for the record, Jim Damery, Let's Council. We're walking through your committee bill on school food programs. And it does two main things. It would require all public schools in Vermont to make available school breakfast and lunch to all students at no charge. And two, it would propose to create incentives for schools to purchase locally produced foods.
Mr. Chair, I can't see anything except something that says navigation.
Yeah,
really?
there's something screwed up.
Not sure where that is. Over here.
There, now you got it.
Oh, you can see it now? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking at my other screen, so I won't be looking towards you. But here we go. Okay, so so the title of this bill is Farm Fresh School Meals for All. And the second section is revisions to chapter 27 on school food programs. So taking the entire subchapter and kind of rewriting it, if you will. I have left in here a number of sections that are unchanged in this bill, only to give you context. And I would propose in the next draft to take out those unchanged portions to make your bill more concise. But I wanted to go through some of those unchanged sections to make sure you have context. So first of all, we have definitions on page 2, looking at lines 1 through 10. No substantive changes there. Those are just changes for clarification. Then starting with section 1262A, award of grants on page 11. So this section is largely unchanged, but I wanted to tell you what's here. So subsection A describes to whom grants are provided for food programs. And so those grants are currently provided to supervisory unions for the use of member school boards, independent school boards to operate food programs, and to approved education programs. The three categories of grants going out to one category going out to these three types of entities. B talks about grants going for infrastructure. So these grants are going for to help construct, renovate, or acquire additional facilities and equipment to provide food for students. And then C says that grants will be provided by the state to those categories: SUs, independent schools, and approved education programs, equal to the sum of the amount that would have been the student's share of the cost of all breakfasts and lunches. So this is for reduced price breakfasts and lunches. There's a federal subsidy for that, and the state kicks some money for the student share of that as well. And that is current law. So A, B, and C are unchanged. But now we have a new D.
So you want to explain that one more time, Jim?
Sure. Explain A, B, and C?
Well, it's for the capital improvements in the kitchen and in that, right?
Yeah, well, A is for B and C. B is for infrastructure, capital improvements in kitchens, and C gives grant funding to SUs, independent schools, etc., to pay for the student share of federally subsidized breakfast and lunch.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. D is new. D is a provision that says that the agency shall award grants to SUs and supervisory districts for locally produced foods. We'll be coming on to that provision shortly. If the amount appropriated is insufficient, then the awards are prorated. That's new language to go with the locally produced food provisions that we'll come on to. Okay, section 1264 is current law, which has some amendments. And the first thing is in line 15, it's saying that each school board operating a public school shall cause to operate within each school in the school district. So you should say within the school district. Now it has to be within each school in the school district. A food program that makes school lunch and school breakfast available under the federal acts to those who qualify for meals under those acts. And then it says school districts.
Jim, Mr. Chair, may I jump in?
Sure. Yeah. If you guys have a question, ask Jim as we're going so we don't forget it.
Are there schools? So I'm trying to just understand the landscape here. Are we concerned that there are schools that don't have a food program at all?
I think that's a better question left to maybe Faye or the AOE.
We do have some.
If it's okay for me to chime in, I can answer that question. This is Faye.
Go ahead, Faye.
Okay, yeah, there are a few schools that don't provide meals currently. Just a couple. Right now, for a school to opt out of providing a meal, they have to have that approved by their school in their school budget on town meeting day, which is a little bit later down in this bill. There are just a couple, and then there are some schools who don't have their own cafeteria, so they contract with another school to have meals brought over to their school every day. But most schools do currently provide school meals, and public schools use the National School Lunch Program. There are a few independent schools that provide meals, but they don't take part in the federal program, so they're not taking part in the federal reimbursements.
Okay, so the people that contract out, they're qualified, like they've taken care of this requirement though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's really just a couple of schools that are pretty small schools that don't currently provide any kind of meal program.
Okay. Jim, could I ask you, down at the bottom right of your screen is a little slider. Could you slide that over to be a little bigger? That would really help me out.
How's that?
That's great. That makes a big difference for me.
Okay, so going on, so the first provision, as we talked about, requires each school to make available school lunch and breakfast for those who qualify under federal law. So that's low income, basically. And then it says school districts shall maximize access to federal funds for the cost of the school breakfast and lunch program under various provisions of federal law. And that's obviously to maximize the federal dollars coming in. And then B is really important here because B makes it universal. So A was talking about funding for students who are from low income. But B says, in addition, each school board operating a public school shall cause to operate within each school in the school district the same school lunch and the same school breakfast program made available to students who qualify under federal law to each attending student every school day at no charge. So that just made the whole thing universal for all students for breakfast and lunch.
Does that track what's happening right now, Jim? With our
No, that is new language.
No, but under COVID rules and regs, all schools right now are providing lunch free of charge to our students, I believe. And so does this track what's happening right now in our school system?
I don't know the facts on the ground, so I can't answer that from a factual standpoint. I do believe that the COVID funds are covering school meals for a period of time. That period will obviously end, and then this provision obviously would make it universal going forward.
Do any of our witnesses know the answer to that question?
Yes, this is Faye again. I can chime in. So right now, all schools in Vermont are providing universal school breakfast and lunch, but they're doing so using the summer meals program rather than the National School Lunch Act. And that's simply because there's a waiver. There's actually no funding supporting the programs right now with COVID funding, except that schools are allowed to do this. And so there's a waiver within the USDA that allows them to utilize the summer food service program. And that waiver right now is expected to end at the end of June. So at the moment, we don't expect for it to continue for the following school year. So for families and children, their experience of school meals, I mean, everything is different, right? They're not in the cafeteria, but the experience of access to school meals is universal school meals, as it would be with this bill. From the administrative school food service side of things, they're using a different federal program.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks, Peg. Okay, Jim.
Okay, so we're going down to subdivision C on line 9, which makes it clear that costs that are not reimbursed through federal or state funds or other sources are borne by school districts. So we have federal funds, we have state funds. Again, state funds are coming in for infrastructure and coming in for reduced price meals to make up the student share. And then the rest of the costs for providing these universal school lunches and breakfasts are borne by school districts.
So,
Brian?
yeah, I've got a question. Where are they supposed to get the money? Does that affect property taxes?
It would, yeah, it would be through the local budget.
It would depend, Brian, on each school would probably be different depending on where they are within the reimbursement program with the state. If you live in a town with low incomes and high property values, people pay their taxes based on their income. So if the costs go up and their income doesn't, it'll come out of the statewide school tax, which is paid by, paid into by residents, non-residents, businesses, and all that.
Okay,
Okay, Jim?
Okay, so we're going on to subdivision 2, which is unchanged. It's talking about the summer meal program. So this is existing law unchanged. It requires public schools to offer a summer meal program if certain conditions are met. This is the program that Faye mentioned is being leveraged today to provide universal school meals during the pandemic. And then on next page, subdivision 3 says that in operating its school breakfast and lunch program, a school district shall seek to achieve the highest level of student participation, which may include providing breakfast meals that can be picked up by students, grab and go, making breakfast available to students in classrooms after the start of the school day. And the order there should be an and, I believe, and collaborating with the school's Wellness Community Advisory Council and planning school meals. 4 talks about the household income form. So today, families who fill out the federal forms for school lunches and breakfast, that form would not be, I think, required under this because all students are now entitled to universal school meals. So the idea here is that they would still complete this household income form, which is used to determine a family's economic status to determine eligibility for various state and federal programs. So that form would be required, and you see later on it will be updated as well to reflect best practices. So that's later on in this bill.
Yeah. Could any of our witnesses, do you know if that's the way it is in other states that have universal meals programs, if they no longer have to fill out any financial forms? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Yeah, so this is happening in Vermont too. So the 25% of schools who are already providing universal school meals prior to the pandemic, once a school is into the universal school meals program, for some schools, they will still have to fill out the school meal application the first year, but after that, they don't. So the school meal application is no longer required every year. And that form does collect important financial information, both for other federal nutrition programs and for school eligibility for things like Title I funding, other kinds of federal funding. And so what happens in the schools that don't require the school meal application anymore is they use it. It's called a household income form. So that's happening in Vermont schools already. And that's what happens across the country. I know I was just talking with someone from New York City. So all schools in New York City provide universal school meals and have for a number of years. And there was concern about what would happen when the school meal application went away. and they've seen no change in, no decline in families turning in that form. So the household income form works really well. And in Vermont, it could be, the form itself could be improved to be a little bit more user friendly. So that's where in this bill, it creates some structure for that collaboration to make sure the form is working really well every year. So that way we're guaranteed to, keep that information coming in to help fund programs.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, okay, Jim?
Okay. Subsection B is unchanged from current law, and it provides the ability to receive a temporary waiver of 20 days from the requirements of offering school meals in the event of an emergency. C is unchanged. This reinforces that the state will be responsible for the student's share of the cost of reduced price breakfast and lunches. And then we struck line. Sorry. Is there a question?
Well, I do have a question. It has Rosie been part of the drafting here, or once we go through this, we'll have to turn to her? Or I'm just curious. I know a coalition was helping to pull this together.
Rosie has not been part of it. I reached out to her to let her know about this kind of merging of the three issues, but I haven't heard back.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Chris, Rosie, a lot of her ask is about getting adequate help to be able to handle, the meals program in a more efficient way. I think, we're going to have to work on getting her an additional person over there, but that's, we've got to talk about that as we move forward.
Yeah, I'm just sensitive to, I think she sort of said,
Key.
take it easy on me.
Yeah.
I've been through a lot, which is fine. I mean, taking it easy on her could involve getting her the deputy she deserves in state statute. But anyway, just for my information, it's helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Jim.
Okay. So you will see that subsections D and E are struck from the section, but they are reappearing in the next section because these have to deal with locally produced foods, and we have a whole section on that now. So right here. So section 1264A, locally produced foods, is new, and it states a goal that by 2023, at least 20% of all foods purchased by SUs and supervisory districts will be locally produced foods. Importantly, before I go into detail on this section here, let me just give you an overview of how it works. This is a little bit confusing. There is a grant program we'll come on to, which says that a school district in the first year of the grant program can define for itself what locally produced foods mean. And if 20% of the foods under their definition of locally produced foods, they could get grant funding for 1 year, basically. And then after they've done that, if they want to get further grant funding, they have to use the state definition of locally produced foods. And there's further grant funding that goes on forever if they hit certain targets of locally produced foods as defined by the state. So it's a two-step process here. First year using their own definition, and then thereafter using the state definition. So, sorry?
Then they'd have to purchase, does that increase that 20%, does that increase at all as we move into outer years
It
of
does.
the program?
It does. Yeah, I'll come on to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of Section B here, school boards have the discretion to define what foods are included within the definition of locally produced foods. So it says in B that on before end of this year and annually thereafter, school board operating a school lunch, breakfast, or summer meals program shall report to the Agency of Education an estimate of the percentage of the cost of all foods purchased by the school board for those programs that were locally produced foods during the 1-year period ending on June 30 of that year. So take it in this context, by the end of this year, they'll be reporting on their locally produced foods for the prior school year. That report will include the school district's budget for its food program, its sources and amount of funding to pay for its food program, and the cost of its food program.
Is that something that the school boards are having to do now, Jim?
I believe so. Yes, this is kind of part of existing law that's carried over from the previous section. We'll put here.
And Jim, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Jim, I remember we spent a lot of time about this last year, the sort of timing of buying the food, delivering, kids eating the food, reporting, and then getting a reimbursement. Could you, or maybe you're about to do it somewhere else, but could you just help remind me of that chronology?
Yep, we're about to do that. So they report on before December 31st of this year for their food purchases for the last school year. And then we're talking about the grant funding, which will come on to your dates, Senator Pearson. So that says, begin with the 21-22 school year, thereafter, SUs shall be eligible for a food incentive grant. And then it says supervisory unions may apply for the grant if it has done a few things. One, developed a locally produced food purchasing plan that describes the SU's goals for purchasing locally produced foods. 2, or B, designate an individual as the food coordinator for locally produced foods. C, develop a process for tracking the purchase of locally produced foods. And D, comply with the reporting requirements that we just talked about above. Now, let me get into some dates here. So 3 says the SU that has satisfied the conditions that we just went through on or before January 15, or on or before January 15 of any year thereafter, apply to the agency for the grant by submitting certification by the business manager that it satisfies the conditions that we just went through. And then it says that if the SU is eligible for the grant, the agency will make the grant payment on or before the following March 31st. And that grant will be equal to 15 cents per reimbursable school lunch served by the SU in the prior school year. So let's just review those dates again. So you have school year ending June 30 of 2021. You have a report due December 31st, 2021 of what you've done. And then you are able to get the grant funding. Then you're able to certify that you're in compliance by January 15th of 2022. And then the payment will be made by March 31st of 2022. Okay. But it's not just 2022, because this goes on to say on line 7 and 8, a supervisory union may apply for this grant and receive this grant funding only once. So those dates are movable. So a school supervisory union can apply for the first time anytime from now going forward, and those dates will be those dates. perhaps just apply once under this program. It can't apply again. It has to then apply under the next program, which is using the state definition of locally produced foods. You pause
So-
there.
Yep. So all these reporting requirements for a supervisory union are not in place at the moment and would increase the administrative load on that union. Is that correct?
The only requirement in place today, I believe, is the one up here back to it, that we moved from the previous section. But B has this requirement that there be an annual report. But everything else is designed to get grant funding. So it would be additional work in order to get the grant funding.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, keep track of your question and we'll, when we have Rosie in, we'll get a definite answer for you.
Yep.
Okay, Jim?
Okay. We are on line 9 now, subdivision 5A. So this says that if the SU has received a grant under the previous section, so if it's received a 1-year grant based on its own definition of locally produced foods, then after that, on before January 15th of 2023 or January 15th of any year thereafter, it can apply for a further grant by submitting information that demonstrates that at least 15% of the cost of all foods purchased or grown, raised, or produced by the SU during the 1-year period ending on June 30 of the previous year were local to Vermont, as defined in Act 129. Excluding 3 things, 3 categories. 1, excludes foods purchased or grown, raised or produced by the SU that were used to provide catering services for which the SU received compensation. 2, it excludes unique food products as defined in Act 129, and excludes fluid milk.
What does 1 or little I mean there? Is that like a hot dog at the game?
Yeah, so if the SU produces its own food and then sells it at a game or a function, so it receives compensation, they can't count that food under this program.
But like right now in the cafeteria, they receive compensation. But I guess that doesn't apply here because we've moved that.
Yeah,
I take it like a lot of booster clubs sell hot dogs at like basketball games, and so we're going to be buying the food for the booster club, and they still got to go buy their own food and then keep their profit. At least high schools up here, I know it's the booster clubs that feed, the sports crowds.
But my point was that like today in the cafeteria at lunch, kids pay, so the supervisory union receives compensation. But I guess we're no longer doing that because of the first part of the bill. Is that right?
Well, this is for catering services. Maybe that needs to be defined more specifically. This definition is not defined, and it's not supposed to be for the usual school lunch and breakfast programs. It's for other services that the school might offer.
Amy?
Yeah, thank you. Senator Pearson, I think what this is saying is that they can't count that food as part of counting for their local food incentive. It doesn't mean they can't charge for the food. So if they're selling a hot dog at the game, they can still charge for it. It's just not part of the reimbursement for this incentive. That's my understanding.
Yeah. No, that's clear to me. I'm just seeing that they are getting reimbursed. I mean, if I go visit a school lunch program to meet with students, I might buy lunch. So, but this is why So the supervisory unions are being compensated for lunch today, but I believe that this maybe does make sense because it's under the context of the early part of the bill where everybody gets free lunch. Is that right?
I think you would need to ask Rosie to clarify, but I think it depends on the definition of reimbursable meal. I'm not sure if you as an outsider purchase lunch, it's a reimbursable meal.
Yeah, if I could just comment on this, I think the really important, this is Betsy Rosenbluth with Vermont Feed. The really important part of this is catering services. So when you buy lunch, that's not a catering service. You're buying a lunch and paying for that lunch. And I think it was just to clarify, we wanted to have as broad and most inclusive. So that includes breakfast, lunch, snack, summer meals. But when it came to catering, like if the school nutrition program was catering a school board event or something like that, I think the committee last time felt like that is a little beyond what we're trying to do in terms of counting, making that in the count of your percentage. So it was very specific to catering services.
Thank you. That makes a big difference.
Okay, Jim?
Okay. Okay, so we define what local to Vermont means here with 3 exclusions. And then if the SU grows, raises, or produces its own food, it shall assign a fair market value to that food, reporting cost. And then it says if the SU is eligible for a grant, then just like before, the agency shall, before the following March 31, make the grant payment. And it's determined as follows. So it's 15 cents on reimbursable school lunch. For the prior year, for SUs purchasing at least 15% of locally produced foods. 20 cents if you are purchasing at least 20% locally produced foods, and 25 cents if you're purchasing at least 25% locally produced foods. And then it says that an SU may apply and receive this grant funding for each year that qualifies for this grant funding. So this is a forever type program. And then it goes on. 8 talks about the agency doing sample audits of these programs to verify the information is accurate and the ability to correct basically and readjust payments if there's been over or under payments.
And
Good.
I believe they already audit hot lunch programs anyhow. Is that correct?
They may censor, I don't see that in the law, but maybe the advocates can comment on that.
They do. It's required by the federal government for the program. So the goal here was to to make sure that there's a mechanism for kind of checking in without increasing the burden on the schools or the kind of bureaucracy part of it too much. So sample audits to just make sure that everything is kind of following in line.
And could somebody remind me why we exclude fluid milk? I recall it's confusing, and so, you know, and would only have the impact of bumping up the percentage. So it's a wash, but can we just make, can we as a committee probably need to be pretty clear on that.
Sure, I can.
It all comes from out of state.
Yeah, I can address that if you would like. So in New York, the threshold is 30% local food. And so including fluid milk works fine. in Vermont, with a threshold that begins at 15%, we looked at 3 different independent district food costs, and milk alone was already around 15%. I could tell you the exact, it ranged from 14 to 16% of the cost. So almost all of it is hood milk. If for some reason hood milk was over 50% Vermont milk in that mix, then this program wouldn't incentivize any new purchasing. Your milk would qualify you. So I think that either an approach of a higher percentage, or because schools are already required to serve milk at the meals, breakfast and lunch, that it's, and most of them are serving hood at this point. It'd be great if it was more Vermont milk. It's all regional milk. And it seems like this particular program is to encourage extended local purchasing beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jim?
Okay, so we are on subsection D, which is a reporting section. So it requires the Agency of Education to annually report to you on 2 things. A is the information received from SUs regarding the percentage of locally produced foods as SUs define them. And B is a report on the percentage of locally produced foods using the state definition. And then these reports go on really forever, because the provisions that cancel them after 5 years is disregarded. Then we have a strikeout. So there is currently a law and exemption available to school districts to be exempt from providing school meals for a 1-year period, and that exemption would be struck. The next, section 3, is amending a statute that defines excess spending, which is the penalty for spending too much as part of your school budget. And the way that works is if you spend over a certain amount, you get taxed twice on the overage. And this exempts from excess spending costs incurred by a school district or SU to provide school breakfast and lunch. So basically, all the budget that would be devoted to school meals would be exempt from excess spending penalty. And then we have succession law. So we have two sets of succession law here. One that deals with the universal school breakfast and lunch, and a separate group that deals with the locally produced foods. So this part here, section 4, says that school district shall count time spent by students consuming school meals during class as instructional time. 5 is a transitional period, so it gives schools 5 years to comply with these requirements around universal meals.
See, why are we, we've had people come in and testify that their children are not allowed only 10 minutes for lunch or 15 minutes for lunch. And, if we're going to be providing good, wholesome lunches for people, you shouldn't have to gulp it down or hurry through your lunch hour or get marked tardy for getting to your next class. And here we're going to allow lunchtime to be spent as instructional time. And, you know, back when I was on the board, when I first went on the board, the teachers would go eat with the students at hot lunch. Well, they worked themselves right out of that process. The teachers have. And so the kids go eat, the students go eat without the teacher. And now we're going to allow that as instructional time. You know, there's something wrong with that picture, I think. You know, I don't mind paying for the free lunch, but I'm not going to pay people or give them money for instructional time when they aren't even with the students eating lunch. What do you, I mean, is there any comments on that?
Well, I think the intent here is a little different, Senator Starr. This says that time spent by students consuming school meals during class. So it's not in the cafeteria. It is basically if you're bringing your food into the classroom, you can eat it during class, and you won't be docked instructional time for emails during class. And that ties back to this earlier section, which I'll come back to. If I can find it for you, which, let me find it. Other than that. Yeah, here. So earlier we talked about this section here where it says operating a school breakfast and lunch program, a school district shall seek to achieve the highest level of student participation, which may include grab-and-go meals, making breakfast available to students in classrooms after the start of the school day. So that's relating back to the B here, saying that you can provide food in the classroom. And this later section is saying if you do that, you won't be docked instructional time for having your meal in class.
I agree with Senator Starr. I think there's going to be some kind of unintended consequence of this. I mean, I just think I'm not that far out of high school. I just graduated 13 years ago from high school, and where I went, they only gave us 22 minutes to cross to another building, eat, and get back to class. And, you know, they're just, I think, you got to give students enough time to eat. And then as a kid who probably ate a breakfast or two during class time in my day, you're not really learning while you're eating your breakfast. You're enjoying your breakfast and just sitting there. So I just think I get what we're trying to do, but I think it's a little clumsy still. I don't know what the fix is, but I see where Senator Starr is going and I support it.
Yeah, but
I think we need to talk about that. So
yeah, because the alternative here is we're forcing the day to be longer, right?
Yeah.
Well, or less study opportunities or something, but I think we all feel that feeding children is a great idea, and it makes them healthier and stronger and they learn better. But if you eat too fast, that's not a healthy way to eat. And they should have 30-minute lunch break, but I guess we'll have to have professional folks in to talk with them why they can't have a 30-minute lunch break and have it staggered so that all the children can fit into the cafeteria at their given time. Right? We need to discuss that, I think.
I agree.
Mr. Chair, could I provide a little context for that? Is that possible?
Sure.
So we're with you. Children definitely need more time to eat, especially at lunch. Mandating different, time to eat it gets into union contracts and a whole other sort of set of issues within education. What this language is actually doesn't change anything. So this is based on a memo that schools are currently operating from the former Secretary of Education, Secretary Holcomb, when she was secretary. And all this is regarding the breakfast after the bell models. So we know that breakfast participation is much, much stronger when students are allowed to eat breakfast in the breakfast after the bell model, where they don't have to get to school early before the school bus and before school starts and eat in the cafeteria when everybody else is sort of over in the lobby and in the gym or other places before school gets going. This allows kids to grab breakfast in the hallway, to eat during homeroom. It really just supports the breakfast after the bell model. It doesn't change any way that kids are eating now in school. And it's really just about making sure that for schools that are doing, allowing students to eat breakfast during homeroom or something like that, that doesn't change the length of the school day, as Senator Pearson was mentioning. So the intent here is just to make sure that practice continues to be allowed for breakfast after the bell, which we know increases participation and is one of those best practices that are referred to earlier, that schools are required to take advantage of the best practices that work for them. So not every school will have school breakfast in the classroom, but it works really well in a lot of schools.
Is it, can it be construed to mean lunch too, Faye? Or is it pretty clear that it's only for breakfast?
I think from a school administrating the program perspective, it's clear, but I think, something to maybe ask about is whether or not that should just identify school breakfast in particular, as opposed to school lunch.
Yeah.
So that might be a clarity that would make the committee feel a little bit more comfortable around this provision, because I definitely hear what you all are saying and agree. Especially as we have more local food and fresh food in schools, it takes a lot longer to eat a salad or a grain bowl than it does to eat a piece of pizza. So that's another goal we have in the long run. But this is really just meant to allow for breakfast after the bell models.
Yep. Okay, Jim.
Okay. So section 5 is a transition section giving school districts 5 years to comply with these requirements. And then B1 is an appropriation of $1 million from the Ed Fund to the Agency of Agriculture Food Markets for fiscal year 22 for the Farm to School program established under 6 VSA section 4721. And this funding shall be used by the Agency of Agriculture Food Market to award grants during the 5-year transition period to school districts that are transitioning to making available school breakfast and lunch for all students at no charge. The agency shall establish criteria for awarding this grant funding, which may include funding for capital expenditures, staff support, administration, and again, this should probably say and training. And then each school that receives a transition grant has to report to the Agency of Agriculture Food Markets as to how the funds are used. And unused funds will revert back to the Farm to School program. Then section 6 has a requirement that before August 31st of this year and annually thereafter, the Agency of Education, in collaboration with Hunger Free Vermont and the Vermont Association of School Business Officials, will update that household income form to reflect best practices. And then it creates a position at the AOE, one full-time classified position specializing in the administration of school food programs, and vacant position. And there's appropriation from the general fund for fiscal 22 in the amount of $100,000 for salary, benefits, and operating expenses. Then the next group of sections are session law to help facilitate the locally produced food changes. So first, you have section 7, which is that the Agency of Education shall collaborate with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to promote the food program to SUs, farmers, food processors, etc. And then 8 is an appropriation to the Agency of Education for the General Fund for fiscal 22 in the amount of $500,000 for the local food incentive grants that we just went through. And from that appropriation, the Agency of Education may use up to $60,000 to retain a contractor to assist with developing and establishing the local food incentive grants.
Jim, can you go back to section 7 for a second?
Yep.
Isn't that something that's already going on, I would hope? Why do we need to put that in here? I would think that already the Agency of Ed and Ag are together on this. It seems to me to be, if everything is underlined as new to a bill, I guess I'm having trouble understanding why we need that in there. Doesn't that already happen?
I would hope that it's happening. I don't know though, if it, does any of the guests that are on, do they know the answer to that?
I would say one thing, which is this is to promote the local food program under the new program we just went through. So this is, maybe they're doing something already in this space, but this is targeted more to what the new requirements are, or the new grant funding is.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to have Abby on in a little while on other issues, but we could ask about that, or next week when we go back to work on this issue, we can be sure and check that out. Yeah.
you.
Okay, Jim.
Okay. Okay, we went through this already, and yeah, so we went through this. This is the appropriation for the grant program in A. In B, there's appropriation to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets from the General Fund for fiscal 22. It's the annual base appropriation of $500,000 for the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant Program. And then 9 asks the agency to include in its annual budget request to you the amount of $500,000 for the grant funding with the grants we just went through. So every year we include that as this ask. And then lastly, the effective date is on July 1, 2021.
Jim, why are we pegging that at $500,000? That, do we think that's going to cover the incentive? That's not my memory.
That figure was given to me, so I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe it's just a holding place.
Is this second 500,000 the same as the 500,000 that we talked about earlier, or is this additional?
So you have an appropriation on section 8 of $500,000 for fiscal 22 for grant funding. And then this provision here just says, going forward, as part of its budget, the agency will ask for this amount. So it's, basically it comes into you as an ask at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. And we're to the effective date. So are there other questions for Jim? And, the guests that are on with us this morning, if you have questions or statements that you want to, questions of us, feel free to chime in and we can discuss the overall proposal.
Let me stop screen sharing for now.
Yeah. See, we've got this back on the schedule for next Wednesday. And so we'll be able to ask if we had questions for Jim or any of the guests to look up, then we could get some clarity and get that back on Wednesday so that we can move forward. Chris?
So as I understand it, we're phasing in a requirement for universal meals. So, to the extent there's a budget impact, it's not all at once. But can we're obviously going to need to understand really precisely what that is, or what our best estimate. But we know also that right now, because of the pandemic, we're basically at a moment of universal meals. So my question is, today, is that funding something that Vermont did with our CARES Act, or is that something the feds drove directly to the schools?
It's a federal deal nationwide, as far as I know. Is that right, Faye?
Yeah, so what's happening right now is just that the schools, because of a waiver, it's both in that they're just using a different program than they usually are, and they're being allowed to serve it to any child 18 and under. They're actually serving kids, who aren't yet in school too. The federal government authorized increased expenses on the child nutrition program with federal dollars, but they're not actually providing the state with any more money. They're just allowing them to do this program. And what Vermont did that's pretty unique, only a couple of other states have done this, is got the waiver for all of the schools in Vermont. So in other states, we don't have all the schools serving universal school meals. It's pretty unique to Vermont. In other states, the agency left it up to individual schools to say they wanted to do it. Rosie and her team were really proactive in making sure that all schools were able to do it. So, but there is no, besides Congress just authorizing the program, the kind of federal funding for the program to expand to match the use of the program, there's no additional funding coming in right now.
So I'm sorry, Amy, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to add that the legislature did work with the Agency of Education to allow some of the education dollars that were allocated to the state to pay some of the extra expenses directly related to COVID. So schools did benefit from that extra federal funding. That was in the last session. You had that in your one of your bills. And so they were able to buy some things that they needed just to deal with the COVID part, but not necessarily the universal school meals part.
Yeah,
And
I remember the packaging and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I recall
And moving forward, they're in this next bill they've been talking about putting together. I believe, and I've heard that they are talking about money in USDA being set for universal meals, or helping with food and local foods and all those things. And it would seem to me, if we had a program that was designed and set up and really running. They could use us as a pilot for the rest of the country if they wanted to, if they were really serious about doing it. And with the way we're positioned in Washington, one sentence in the approach bill would take care of that. And so I think we're in excellent shape, and we ought to get ready to take advantage of that with a bill similar like this, because we're ahead of the rest of the crew. And we got a guy sitting at the head of the table that can make it happen. and one sitting at the head of the other table that could pay for it. No, I'm just jabbering, but no, I think, we're in good shape to make something good happen. So, Faye?
I wanted to agree with you, Senator, and just say, this is a lot. Going through the walkthrough of all of these different components is a lot. And what's so exciting about it is, I just feel really excited about having these different components together because they really support each other. So the local purchasing, both the local purchasing incentive program and universal school meals would phase in. They would grow over time. So it's not a big, it's not like in the fall of 2022, every single school will have universal school meals and every single school will be hitting 25% of local food and getting that level of incentive. So the impact on the agency is phased and the kind of transition is phased, but they support each other. And, having schools be able to take advantage of the local purchasing incentive can help offset some of the investment needed for universal school meals from school budgets. And then, as Senator Starr pointed out, there's a lot happening at the federal level where every improvement that we make at the federal level to fund school meals and to expand universal school meals will lower the investments that individual schools have to make to go to universal school meals. So I think what we're going to be seeing is the financial impact on school budgets, will shift over time as the federal government starts to pick up more and more of how school meals are funded and moving toward universal school meals. And we feel really confident that in the next year, there will be some shifts that will help make universal school meals more affordable at the individual school level, which will help as we kind of go through that phase-in period. And so I really just appreciated that point, and I wanted to highlight it because I think we are kind of at a moment where the what is happening at the federal level and being set up really well at the state level to make sure the schools are able to take advantage of what's happening at the federal level in an equitable way will make a really big difference in Vermont. And we're sort of we'll be primed to make the most of what's happening and not end up with the situation, where Senator Pearson was asking earlier if there are schools that don't provide meals. Something like the Universal School Meals Bill guarantees that there won't be, 98% of schools providing universal school meals and these couple schools left over that just won't do it or can't get to it. It means, all kids will have equitable access to it regardless of where they live. And so, just the timing is really, really unique and interesting, the way that things are coming together, especially with schools experiencing universal school meals this year across the board too. And I wanted to, if I may, just also highlight in the conversation earlier about AOE getting the support that they need. It would be really interesting to hear what how Rosie sees kind of what's laid out all together with the AOE position and the ability to have a contractor to help get the incentive program up and running. But with the phased in approach, we're hopeful that AOE will have the support they need. And with what's happening this year with schools receiving universal school meals, again, I know we've mentioned this before, but we're hearing from a lot of schools that they can take on universal school meals in the fall if they want to. They don't need this bill. And so there are a lot of schools that want to do that. And so we're really expecting AOE to need the support now for that position, regardless. So that kind of transition is coming, and the bill just creates it, make sure that it's equitable across the state.
Yeah, Chris?
I actually worry a little bit about the phase in. I would guess, practically speaking, we have to do that, but we're in a time where the data is 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 people food insecure in Vermont. We're supplying universal meals right now. The pandemic will end, and that'll evaporate, and the food insecurity will not evaporate, right? It's an amazing, it's actually really scary. So I suppose we are smart from a legislative point of view to consider the phase in, but it just strikes me that there's a lot of promising programs that are happening right now that literally evaporate within 30 days of the emergency order being rescinded. That's, we talk about policy cliffs all the time. Holy smokes. Anyway, thank you. This is really an interesting conversation.
The other positive thing is we, down in the other room where I sit, we do have some extra money this year that we could put toward some of these costs that wouldn't cost taxpayers. It's federal money. I mean, taxpayers are going to pay it someday, but if we don't use it for something like this that has a long-term positive effect on our children and our society, that money, once that's gone, it'll be gone, and then we'd have to raise it through some kind of a revenue enhancement program. So that's another positive thing that's sort of on our side this year if we can get to the point to move this forward. Yes, Betsy?
Yeah, I agree how exciting this is. And just a small note to remember that with a goal of 20% buying local, and schools are spending over $15 million on food, that's $3 or $4 million coming back into the Vermont economy. So, that works, it all works together to, as you say, Mr. Chair, the win-win-win of taking care of our kids and supporting our families, and at the same time supporting the farmers.
And helping everybody's food security. We've got, I believe, we have another crew that's supposed to be on now. For an hour. So I think we'll have to switch gears, but hopefully you folks can come back next week, and we'll have Rosie. We'll invite Rosie in, and if there are changes that Jim should update on that draft, Jim, we should try to get those taken care of. Chris?
Just a question, Mr. Chair. It sounds like you've been talking to Senator Kitchell, which that committee will play an important role in this, obviously. But should we have a strategy to reach out to Senator Campion and folks down the hall from Senate Ed, or what's the strategy there? Because this is a pretty big lift. I don't think we can spring it on them with a few days.
Of course, last year we had Ruth with us and was also in there, and I talked with Phil a lot as he went by our room in the morning. He'd stop in and we'd visit, and we aren't afforded that opportunity this year. Yes, we've got to make contact either with Senator Campion or someone in his room that would be good at helping to steer this along in there, because they're gonna be playing a role, certainly a major role in trying to promote this. I don't know, do any of you have any particular connections in the
Well,
other room?
Senator Lyons is in there. I'm just looking, Senator Chittenden, and Senator Perchlik, Hooker, Campion, and Terenzini. So, I mean, I'm happy to start talking to them. Maybe that's as good as if we all just start chatting with folks we can, so that they can expect something coming. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks a lot to our guests for your time this morning. I think you've done a good job working with Jim, putting this whole package together. And I think that's a good, smart move to go out with a full package instead of piecemealing it and going that way. So anyways, thanks a lot. And we'll see you hopefully next Wednesday at 9:00.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And so we have Abby Willard with us from the agency. Oh, she's right there, just waiting to get going.
We'll take a break though, Senator, if you guys need, just so you know I'm here.
Yeah. That was a great presentation yesterday, Abby. I thought it went very well with a lot of work went into that, and a lot of good stuff is in there to follow along. Are you going to be working along with us this morning, or is Ellen coming too?
I believe it's just us.
Yeah.
Ellen, I don't think is joining today.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, it's always good to see you up there all by yourself. I think what we would like to hear is, I believe last fall, late summer when we were still meeting, I believe it was, I talked with Anson in regards to helping the slaughter industry with some COVID money to advance their slaughter facilities to put out more product. And at that point in time, we had no really good numbers about who could and who couldn't, or who would be interested. And then I heard, I think Anson told me you did, or somebody did some type of a phone survey, or called on the slaughter facilities to see if they were interested. But by the time we got those answers, it was kind of late in the process. So I think we'd like to get an update on those numbers and how we could advance the slaughter facilities in the future, so that we could get more animals done.
Great.
So that's where we are, and so we'll go from there.
Okay. So Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture, for the record. And I think what I can offer to you, Senator, and to the committee would be the variety of conversations and efforts that we've engaged in over the past year with the slaughter and processing community, and share some of the kind of like next step recommendations that we imagine. I will also note that there is some additional data that I think we could and should collect, and that does include the throughput capacity of our existing slaughter and processing facilities, which that's not a number that we have or that facilities report to us, but I think through an outreach effort, we can collect more of that data.
Yep.
So the bit of pieces that I guess I wanted to share is that through the development of the Ag and Food System Strategic Plan, we did a variety of stakeholder engagement efforts. One was a call with the sheep and goat industry specifically, and we produced the variety of different meat channel briefs, as well as a particular brief on meat, slaughter, processing, and products. And so through the development of those briefs, there were a variety of conversations around how to support those various industries. And then, as I mentioned yesterday, Ellen Kaler worked with the Agency of Agriculture, but Ellen from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund did reach out last September, so September of 2020, to the slaughter and processing facilities to ask them two specific questions. One, how were they implementing the COVID protocols, and how were they doing financially, with an objective to ensure that we would not have mass closures of meat processing facilities as it happened out in the Midwest. So I can share some of the feedbacks that came from that conversation. Since those discussions, there's been a entrepreneurial resurgence in new slaughter and processing facilities expressing the desire to come online in the next year. And so I can share a little bit of that data as well. So does that sound like it would be helpful for you all to hear from? Okay. So maybe I'll start with the conversations that Ellen had in September with facilities. And so what we found at that time was that they're really busy. It was a difficult time to try to capture facilities on the phone because they are coming into their very busy season in the fall and early winter, which is traditionally when producers process animals so they don't have to overwinter and feed livestock through the winter. So it was challenging to sort of get them on the line during that time. But from the conversations that Ellen did have, it was clear that small capacity increases would not be sufficient to address the increased demand for local meat that they were experiencing last fall. That any kind of capacity expansion needed to be significant to be able to overcome the bottlenecks in processing that were being experienced at facilities. Every plant that was interviewed acknowledged that they were at maximum capacity of their plant's infrastructure. So the use of the rails and storage, cold storage, as well as staffing. So they were running as many shifts as they could with the staff capacity that they had. They also acknowledged that they were turning away new accounts, specifically beef, because they were so full and operating at capacity. They, at that time, were scheduling out about 6 months, so into March of 2021. And now we're hearing and have heard from producers, as I suspect your committee has also, that clients, customers, appointments were being canceled and have been canceled, and that processing is being scheduled into 2022.
A whole year.
Or at least at this point, 10 months. We did hear and did learn that, many producers had slaughter and processing appointments, but they had ramped up production in response to the local meat demand, and they were not able to get additional animal appointments in response to, the bottlenecks in the processing capacity. we also did learn that facilities were taking the COVID protocols very seriously. And so thankfully we had business owners and staff and entrepreneurs that were following the COVID protocols. So felt like we had safe meat processing kind of workplaces and products being produced during this pandemic. So then I would say I'll share what we learned about increased processing capacity in the state, slaughter and processing. So there are currently, and this I think was in a recent Digger article, so it's pretty public, but there's 7 slaughter and processing establishments that are currently in various stages of planning and or development, kind of building, and expect to come online in the next year. So what we know about these new facilities is that they will work towards addressing the processing capacity demand that exists currently in Vermont. So again, what we know is that processors are generally able to get slaughter appointments. What they're not able to get is processing of the meat appointments. So we're hearing from some of the, and this would be our meat inspection section, is hearing from some of the custom meat processors that are looking at arrangements where they can take carcasses from slaughter facilities and are working to get their HACCP, or their hazard control and critical control point plans in place so that they can come under inspection and can process meat that's been slaughtered in a slaughter facility and then be sold by the customer. So there's some new partnerships that are starting to develop between slaughter and custom processing facilities. We're also hearing that facilities are adding additional slaughter days. So normally, all plants are working Monday through Friday, but we have not been requested to do any weekend shifts from those facilities. But what they have done is that they may typically slaughter 2 to 3 days per week, and now they're increasing slaughter to be 3 to 4 days per week, again, in response to the increased demand. And then of those 7 new facilities, there's some that are slaughter and some that are processing. So it would be 4 slaughter facilities, 3 new processing facilities, and then there's 4 additional custom processing facilities that are, again, in various stages of coming online in the coming year. And there's probably others that are more adept at talking about the specifics of those business models, but these are all, individual entrepreneurs that are making the decision to go into this business or increase their engagement of operation to have a variety of those come under inspection.
So that's 4 slaughter and 3 processing?
And then 4 additional custom processing facilities as well.
Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. So Abby, I'm curious, and I realize it's a guess on your part, or at least a estimate. If the 7 come online quickly, and I'm not sure how quickly that is, do you think that the demand, it's kind of like trying to get a doctor's appointment at this point. I mean, you're months and months and months out. If all of those open up, will that basically take care of the demand in your view?
So that is the question, Senator Collmore, and I don't have the answer to that because of that data point that we don't yet have, which is what is the throughput capacity of our existing facilities and what's the throughput capacity anticipated for these new operations, coupled with what's the livestock industry's holdover of livestock that's ready for processing over the next year. And so I think there's some aspects of that data that we can collect. I think they will be estimates, they will be ranges, but I think that's a really important sort of assessment of supply and demand that we do need to and should be able to get some pretty good data points on. And I think that speaks to, some of the conversations that came up in the creation of the strategic plan, that there's just more engagement with the slaughter processing and meat production communities that we need to do. And that's kind of one of the intentions of recreating, there was one, but a meat processing task force to sort of facilitate some of those conversations.
Anthony?
Hi, Abby. I'm just wondering whether there's any special consideration that's being given to or even needed in terms of lamb and goat producers. I know that obviously it's there's dominant, and I wonder if there's an instance where maybe lamb producers are being held further back because there's more beef going through, and I also don't know whether what I'm about to say makes any sense at all, but would there be any difference in setting up a plant just for sheep and lamb? I mean, just for lamb and goats? I mean, I don't know if it would be any different. It just seems they're smaller animals, but I don't know whether, I just wonder if there's been any consideration of like trying to make sure that we make space for lamb and goats.
Senator Polino, that's certainly a concern that we have heard. And when we've had stakeholder engagement with the sheep and goat community, they have expressed on both sides, and we can talk about that, both a professionalism needed within the production community to sort of go from hobby operation to full scale sheep or lamb and goat industry production, and also an increase in processing capacity needed. So my response to that question would be that yes, there has been a dearth of processing capacity in Vermont for small ruminants. I think that's well known. And again, we have heard from producers whose appointments have been canceled, and they've, not just in Vermont, but even in Massachusetts, as the bottleneck for processing continues to tighten. And those facilities have canceled appointments to either better match with their schedule of staffing, or possibly to take on beef clients that they are more lucrative. I think that has been the challenge, is just this acknowledgement that processing per pound of a smaller animal like a sheep or a lamb or a goat is less profitable for a processing facility. It takes more time and there's less output in meat, therefore less payment per animal back to the slaughter and processing facility.
Well, we had a witness back a bit ago this year say that, as goats, it would cost basically as much to get it slaughtered and processed as what the meat would cover selling it, and it made it, but felt that if a slaughter facility was established just for small animals, that it would work a lot faster and be more efficient than using a regular slaughter facility with high rails and all those things. And so if we did have one that was set up just for small ruminants, it would seem to make sense. I don't know if that's accurate. But.
Yeah.
I wonder just where hogs fit into this. Are they considered small or big or in between? I mean, what's the deal with pork?
That's a good question, and I can't speak intelligently enough or informed enough on that topic. My understanding is that there's more meat per animal in a pig, that it is more profitable than a small ruminant. So I think that pigs and beef are in a different category than sheep, than lamb and goat. But to that point, we have heard from a sheep producer in southern Vermont that uses a southern Vermont slaughter facility, and they put 600 sheep a week through that facility and are reaching the halal market. And so that's, this is where processing becomes the bottleneck. So, and this is also where there's some industry education opportunities, where if the processing gets bottlenecked when the customer is requesting, butterflied lamb chops and very specific cuts of meat that take more time and are more nuanced for the butcher to prepare, versus halal, which is, as I understand, a slaughter process, and then the animal is transported to the customer and they're doing the processing.
Yeah.
Or the processing is happening just into primal cuts. So, you've just got quarters or halves, and then the detailed cutting is happening by a custom butcher or by the consumer. And so that is something that I think is part of the producer education piece, which is we are bottlenecking at the processing level because we are requesting such nuanced cut sheets, and we're asking for such specific cuts. And each animal sometimes can have a different product or specification of cuts that just takes so long at the slaughter level in the facility. And so acknowledging that there's some education and a role that the meat industry can take to help streamline their processing requests and communicate to their customers what's available that may be a little different than what the customer would have originally desired. So
Have you run into anybody who's interested in just doing a small ruminant slaughter processing facility?
Well, we think that, and I don't know, but when in conversations with our meat inspection section, that one of the facilities opening in South Royalton may have the desire to do work with small ruminants. I don't know if it'll be small ruminants exclusively, but that's part of their kind of portfolio of in their business plan to sort of work with small ruminants. And there are other plants that are also processing small ruminants. I think there are some tough choices being made by these businesses to get more throughput. And so they're selecting bigger animals and the more profitable carcasses than the smaller carcasses, which is still incredibly unfortunate and really frustrating for the sheep and goat industry.
Right.
So, have you worked with anyone from Mass or Southern New England in regards to trying to get Vermont meats into a market down in that area, Abby? Or
Vermont meats for retail sale or for processing?
Well, retail sale, or either way, you could, if they had a lot of processing down there, you could have the slaughter here and ship the carcasses to a processor. But I'm wondering about beefing up the beef, now trying to get more meats as we as farmers want to transition or get into other areas of production. We can take care of ourselves, but it'd be nice to have a market where they could send X number of animals a week or a month to a place that would be willing to pay a fair price for them.
Yeah, and so we did later, this November, December, sent 2 different letters, one to Vermont slaughter and processing facilities and one to our meat producers. The letter to our meat producers included a list of processing facilities in Vermont as well as processing facilities in the Northeast. So there is such a list that exists on the USDA website to just sort of make sure that our producers had contact information to reach regional slaughter and processing capacity if they needed to. Just acknowledging that if they were running into bottlenecks in the Vermont facilities, that we didn't want that to mean that they were not able to put meat into the marketplace for the consumers that were increasing that demand. And then the letter to the processors in Vermont offered a variety of options for them to explore, and opportunities that we could offer to expand production. We offered to do overtime if needed in inspection supervision. So we said that we would add additional shifts if that would help them kind of work through the bottleneck and add more throughput to their week schedule. And we reached out specifically to custom facilities and said if they were interested, because there's some of them that are very, very close to being able to operate under inspection, and said, you just need to, complete or submit a HACCP plan, and then you would be meeting federal and state inspection requirements, and you could be able to process under inspection. And
that's all free, right?
Creation of a HACCP plan, they may need to pay a consultant, but the inspection is at no cost. Yes.
But the inspection is free, and that allows them to ship interstate, right?
Right. And so then that was the other thing that the agency kind of facilitated this year was the Cooperative Interstate Shipping program that would allow meat that's processed at Vermont inspected facilities to be able to be sold across state lines. So there's few states in the country that participate in that program. Vermont now has been approved, and our state inspection standards, because they meet the federal inspection standards, would allow for meat processed in those facilities to be shipped across state boundaries. Those farms still need to sign up for the program and enroll in the program, as I understand. But we have this, market expansion opportunity for state inspected Vermont meats, which is great. And I think a real opportunity for some businesses.
Chris?
Abby, can you just remind us if you know the intersection between the federal regs and the state regs? Is this a case where the state carries out the federal regs, or do we in Vermont make it a lot harder than the federal standards? Just help us help me understand and remember some of those delineations, please.
Yeah, I'll do the best I can, Senator Pearson. I think that someone from our meat inspection section is the expert in this field, but our state inspection requirements for meat slaughter and processing are equivalent to the federal standards.
Or better.
And we do have additional components, like so Vermont slaughter has, slaughter facilities have humane handling plans. So that's not a federal inspection requirement, but that's a decision that Vermont has made, and all of our slaughter facilities have to adhere to those. We do have state Agency of Agriculture inspection staff that oversee the slaughter at federal plants. So we do cover what they call federally inspected plants, and we do that regularly. Maybe, and I don't even know how frequently, but that's a big part of the work that our meat inspection section staff do, is cover federal plants under slaughter. So again, we are observing the slaughter of every animal in a federal or state inspected slaughter facility every time, all the time. And we just have to do checks on state inspected processing facilities that they're adhering to and following their HACCP plan requirements. So that's probably the best amount of detail that I can comfortably provide.
I think Michael, have you chased that down, Michael?
I think Abby just did a great job of explaining it. It's the equal to status that's available to all states under the federal rules. If the state is deemed equal to by USDA, then they are able to inspect federal plants. They're able to inspect plants so that the product can be shipped interstate, right? If you don't have equal to status, the federal inspectors have to come in order for you to ship interstate. And so this gives the state's slaughter facilities much more access to the inspectors and opportunity for markets. And it's, I think it's a pretty good program as states slaughter inspection programs go. The one kind of variable that Vermont has that is not provided underneath, well, it's not specifically provided under the federal rules, along with the humane handling plan that Abby referenced, is the on-farm slaughter provision that you provided. Technically, that is just an exercise of the personal slaughter exception under the federal rules, but you've built some structure around it to allow for people to exercise the personal slaughter exception on farms where they purchase the animals.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think, thank you, Michael. Anthony, you had a question?
Yeah, this might just be clarifying, and you may have already given me the answer, but I thought there was these plants where you had to have a USDA inspector there and you needed a bathroom for the person, and there was all those kind of requirements. You're saying this equivalency thing does away with the need to have those federal people there?
No, so there will be either a federal person there or a state of Vermont meat inspection section inspector there with the same requirements being required.
But you don't need a federal in other words, if we open 7 plants, we don't need 7 USDA inspectors to come live in Vermont.
That's right. So our state inspectors sometimes cover those federal plants based upon their workload and where they're covering across the Northeast. But the same requirements apply. There still has to be a separate bathroom available for the inspector, and there's still the same federal rules are required, and our state inspectors have to ensure that those are being met in those federally inspected plants.
And,
Thanks.
and
So, Chris?
is it the case that literally 100% of the time that they're slaughtering, we have a state employee there?
Or a federal inspector, yes.
Right. So
Yeah.
if we have several new plants coming online, are we going to have to increase staff? I mean, is there a fee that takes care of that, or?
Well, that's a great question. It's not a year that we are planning to increase fees. And we are recognizing that with new facilities, there will be an increased staffing capacity need within the meat inspection section at the agency, yes.
Yeah, but I think you have I think Anson has in his budget a couple of more positions, I think.
I think there's one position being sought out of the position pool for an additional meat inspector. Yes. Yeah. Whether one position will be sufficient, I think continues to be the question as we see more facilities come online. And again, we did not anticipate that there would be 7 new facilities in the next year when last August, when we were building budgets. We anticipated one additional staff person being needed. And so that's what's in the budget currently.
But don't forget, Chris, we got 50 less farms to inspect. So maybe, people do get retrained and readjusted to do multitasking. So
we have talked about that cross-training piece, which I think is an important piece that you mentioned, Senator Starr, of can we have professionals trained, our inspection staff trained to play multiple roles? The meat inspection section is a very specialized skill set. It takes about 6 months to go through the required training to be considered eligible or, approved, certified to be able to conduct state and federal inspections. So that's not a simple process, and it does take time.
It's always more complicated than that. The reason I ask about the fee is I'm assuming these plants pay a fee that effectively help us staff for inspection. Is that fair?
They pay like a licensing fee. Yes.
So if there's 7 new facilities coming online, I would assume we then get an increase in revenue, which might be helpful to pay for personnel. So do we need to, would people find it helpful if we were to add some flexibility in terms of staffing? You mentioned seeking someone from the vacancy pool. If you then suddenly got fees that paid for 4 new people and you didn't have those 4 slots in terms of positions, we're stuck. And so suddenly actually the state becomes a roadblock to this. We're thrilled that there's new processing plants opening up, but we are the problem for them not being able to run smoothly. I'm going to guess you're not allowed to say we need 4 positions, but how are we supposed to sort that puzzle out?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm not in a position to say how many additional positions we need. And having 1 position in the budget, I think, is again what we imagine the demand would be at the time that we built the budget. There is a complicated funding structure around this that I admittedly don't understand because it's not part of my everyday, but I think there could be value to having Dr. Haas or Dr. McNamara from our Food Safety Consumer Protection Division come in and talk about the staffing requirements and funding mechanism for our meat inspection staff. There is a function called cross-utilization, which means, as I understand that, when we are covering inspection of federal plants, we actually get a federal reimbursement for playing that role. When we are engaged in the CIS program, which is that I always forget what the acronym stands for, because it's that new program, Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program. There's also federal resources that support the staff to ensure that program requirements are being met. So there are some federal funds in the mix here. And I think that's what can make it complex to determine what our capacity, our staffing budget might need to be, depending upon how those plants are structured. And so, like, if they're seeking federal inspection and we are then responsible for 100% coverage over that plant, that the compensation for that coverage comes from the federal FSIS program. So anyway, to answer your question though, Senator Pearson, I think there's an additional conversation that could be had with our meat inspection section staff and leadership. And just yesterday, though, we had a conversation of starting to try to predict what our staffing requests might actually need to be based upon the demand of if truly 7 additional facilities come online, and then thinking of how many of them are attempting to be federally inspected versus state inspected. So some of that is a little outside of our hands, and it's really dependent upon the entrepreneur's vision for what they want their facility to be.
Right, and the licensing fees for 7 new facilities is not going to pay for a new employee.
That too, right. Yeah, so that's not how we're able to fully fund the meat inspection staff, is through fees. It's a very small percentage.
It's a very small percentage of how they pay for their inspectors.
So we subsidize.
It was never set up, the registration fee was never set up to cover the inspection. The inspection system was set up to ensure the public, when they go to buy meat, that it was wholesome and fresh and well butchered and cut. So it was set up for the consumer protection. And it's like we have inspectors to inspect gas pumps to make sure the consumer doesn't get changed on gallons, but it's set up for the consumer and not the owner of the gas station or the owner of the gas pumps. Anyways, I think the market, if we're trying to convince farmers and ag land owners to diversify, one area besides veggies and all those good things is in all the meat products. And so that's great news, really, that we have entrepreneurs out there willing to invest money and set up to handle those products as they come on, online from the growers. Abby, did you say something about some type of a task force that it's in the big book that you folks have asked for?
Yeah, so I want to just address really quickly or reiterate the point that you just made, Senator Starr, about the viability of increased meat production in the state. So even during this pandemic, when we've done surveys of ag and food businesses, and I've shared these statistics before, 44% of businesses during the pandemic experienced a loss of sales, so loss in revenue. 14% of businesses that we surveyed saw an increase in revenue during the pandemic due to this demand and desire for local food. Each one of those businesses that saw an increase in increase in revenue and sales had some meat products as part of their profile. So they were raising beef or lamb or chicken, had eggs, goats. And so there's really reiteration of the value of having expanding meat production in the state, and then the desire to have the production, the processing and slaughter kind of match that production. So I just wanted to agree with you that I think there's a lot of potential in these industries, and we do have, a few pieces to figure out around how to get that product to market. So the task force is designed, so there's not a funding need associated with the task force. It will be part of the farm. It is already established and is part of the farm to plate network. And what it will do as a task force is bring together the full supply chain. So bring together producers through to slaughter and processing facilities and marketers to talk about where are the gaps and where are the opportunities in getting Vermont meats grown, processed, distributed, and sold to markets in the state, to Vermonters, as well as to regional markets outside of the state. And it's really just like that important conversation space where we can talk about, these three needs that we've identified, which is one, that we know that processing facilities need infrastructure upgrades and improvements. They are, in many cases, old. They were set up and are operating at maximum capacity and not necessarily maximum efficiency. And so there's equipment and infrastructure improvements that I think could improve the throughput in many of these facilities. We also know that there's a workforce shortage and a skilled workforce training need that, again, like as I mentioned, these facilities are now operating Monday through Friday. They have not requested any weekend shifts, and they're saying that they're operating at maximum capacity with the staffing that they currently have. And so continuing to work
with because of cooler space and things like that, right?
Yeah, so some plants are saying that their coolers are full, and so they're turning away slaughter appointments because they have no place to hang the carcasses. Other facilities have they have carcasses hanging and they don't have the staff or the capacity to do the processing and the meat cutting. So I think there's a variety of moments within that kind of process of getting meat to market that are getting hung up in the slaughter and processing facilities. So we know that looks like Michael has his hand up.
Yeah, I thought you were finishing. I just wanted to come in after you. That's all.
That's okay. The last thing I just wanted to say is, and we've talked about this a little bit, but just engaging the meat producers in this educational opportunity of how they want to talk, how they can effectively talk about and share with their customers what cuts of meat and what's available within the marketplace. So rather than having all these really specified and specific nuanced cuts available, not offering that to their customer base, but making a commitment to their customer that they want to make sure that they can have Vermont meats available, and that may mean that there's less variety available on the cut sheet for the consumer.
Michael?
So I just want, I have to go to the House committee, but before I do, I just wanted to tell you, I don't think I heard Abby say that there is money available under the most recent federal funding bill. There's
Yeah.
$60 million available for small slaughter processing facilities to expand capacity. The maximum grant that you can receive is $200,000. That may sound awesome, but it's a federal national program. And just for context, Missouri, which is one of the largest processing states for pork in the country, in their last CRF bill, they appropriated $30 million for their state to expand capacity just in their state. So $60 million and $200,000 grants are great, but the demand for that is going to be significant, and it'll probably be taken up quickly.
Yeah.
So is the moral to your story, Michael, is to get our application in really quick, or?
I think you got to get it in soon, and you might want to advocate for additional monies. The $60 million, they've made it available for 2 years. I don't think it's going to be available for 2 years.
Probably 2 months.
So that's, if somebody says, oh, there's federal money available, you have to understand the context for the demand on it.
And
So-
how far does $200,000 go in terms of setting up a facility?
Well, that's what I was just going to share, Senator Collmore. When we put forth the CRF request for, $3 million, I think it was, for slaughter capacity expansion, we had at least one estimate from a slaughter facility that wanted to redesign their facility, do construction, and purchase additional equipment for processing, and it was a $3 million price tag. So these are, and that's one example, but these are expensive operations and expensive facilities that, $200,000 I think will be helpful if we're talking about equipment upgrades and maybe facility modernization, but we are not going to stand up and build a new slaughter facility or processing facility, most likely for $200,000. There are some units that we're being, kind of exposed to that are on-farm units to do more on-farm processing that are in the $60,000 range. That are these self-contained units, located on a farm that can process, minimal number of animal units, but, might be an option for some farms that want to kind of do the production through to processing on farm. So there's some scale components here too, but they're big businesses.
Is that, Michael, 200,000 per applicant? Because that would give us 1.4 if you had 7 facilities that were coming on. It would certainly help those 7 to some degree if we could.
It's per facility that applies and is awarded a grant.
Could you repeat that?
It's per facility.
Yes.
That applies and is deemed eligible.
So we'd have to get somebody to help each of those 7 and any of the remaining existing facilities that are already with us that we were going to try to get the 3 million for, we could get them to apply. Is there is there a standard act that you just fill in and then tell what you're going to do with the money and each individual one is it?
I haven't seen the federal application yet. I don't know if Michael's looking at it, but normally USDA applications are not simple. They are a bit more involved, and they do provide a template generally, but they're usually looking for a fair amount of information. So I have not looked at the application yet to be able to say how feasible it is for our facilities to complete.
Do you have an employee at the agency that's their only job is to push for grants and it's pretty.
We do a fair amount of promotion about the funding opportunities, and so that goes out in our weekly newsletter that goes out to about 6,000 producers, partners, policymakers. I think you all should get that every Sunday. But that just tells about the opportunity. So that's like one part of the process, is to make sure that businesses are aware of grants and loans and sort of opportunities for that type of financial assistance. But that's not helping them craft an application response. But that assistance does exist within the Farm Viability Network. And so that's part of what those business advisors do.
We only have, I think last year we added another grant writer, I believe at VHCB, but the first year that we did that through ag, we added to Gus's budget and put a grant writer in over there just to go after grants for small towns and villages.
Right.
And
that was the READY program. Yeah.
You know how much that generated the first year?
It was millions. Yeah, it was a lot of proposal. I mean, we used to have, because the funding did come through the agency this last year, the money went directly to VHCB. So we don't get the impact reports any longer. But yeah, those projects were incredibly fruitful to have someone work with businesses and work with communities to apply for community development grants. Were huge.
But I bet, Abby, if we had a person right in the agency that's all they did is chase grant applications for the agency as well as for Vermonters, you guys would bring in a tremendous amount of money from people that just love to give money to farmers and landowners, and especially where we go out of our way to make sure that this is all done in a very fine stewardship fashion but anyways, we're gonna have to thank you, Michael, for being with us. I know you've got to run and we've got to be on the floor in a little bit. Abby, you don't need anything from us in regards to doing your task force on the beef?
No, I'll maybe just end really quickly with the top list of what I think are our takeaways from what we know about the meat industry. So I do hope that we're able to see processors and slaughter facilities in Vermont apply to the USDA small and mid-sized slaughter facility grant program. We will, if Working Lands has a significant appropriation for FY22, I would imagine that the board would consider a call out for meat processing and slaughter capacity as one of its supply chain impact focus areas, albeit those grants will not go out until this time next year. So that's a year away before Working Lands grants from an FY22 budget would be available.
Oh, that take that long, because we're talking of something in the neighborhood of 3.5 million or something.
Right, so those funds aren't appropriated until July, and we typically do a pre-application round to kind of filter through the applications and then do a final application round, which usually means that funds are dispersed in February and March.
Yeah.
I think, sorry?
Did you?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to combine what we're talking about with Senator Polina's earlier questions about facilities for beef really, or not pork and beef. Because it does concern me that it's kind of obvious, and the entrepreneurs maybe are coming in the beef universe, and that won't take care of our suite of needs. So it is part of your plan to help the state and ultimately the working lands folks understand that, opportunity versus need?
Yeah, I think doing the outreach to get a sense of the throughput capacity that currently exists in our facilities, as well as ask that same question of the 7 new facilities that are planning to come online, would be a really valuable bit of data that I think I can commit that the Ag Development Division can help that happen, help collect that information. With that information, I think we may have a better understanding of whether small ruminant capacity for processing is still going to be a bottleneck, or if that would be alleviated by additional capacity.
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, and then the last thing I would say is I think that we could and should promote the concept of servicing small ruminants as well as beef and pigs. I think we do need an entrepreneur that's going to figure out how to do that profitably. And that may be what Senator Polina was suggesting, that we create, that a plant is created that's just focused on small ruminants, and that then they, can get the year-round production, they have steady flow, they set up their rails and their storage and their facility, that's what it's designed for. I have not spoken to an entrepreneur that's interested in doing that, but I hope that they're out there, and that could be something that someone wants to do.
Do we permit these facilities in a way that would allow us to condition a permit on something like this, or?
Well, that did show up in the brief on meat processing as well, that wastewater permitting restrictions both are unclear and often expensive, and have been a hindrance to some of the facilities being expanded or constructed. That's one of the most time-consuming challenges. So I think there are some really great recommendations in the plan that talk about meat processing capacity expansion, and it talks about a position at the University of Vermont Extension. It talks about continuing to offer food safety training courses to help these custom facilities develop HACCP plans and come under inspection. It does talk about clear guidelines around wastewater disposal and composting, and funding to assist with their construction. And then it does acknowledge that as we grow the industry, we will probably need expanded meat inspection section staff capacity as well. So there are some good tangible recommendations there.
So Abby, as we move forward, would it be possible that for you and Alan and who else ever you'd like to involve, to put together, 3 to 5 of the items in the plan, in the big book, that you feel that is most important, and that we could possibly get done this year, and your preference of choices. I mean, we'll have our own,
Yeah.
but you folks with the boots on the ground know where you're being pressured the most to try to get something done. And it would, I think, be helpful to all of us on the committee to try and work with you guys on that and get some of this moving this year.
And Senator, you're saying 3 to 5 priorities that are specific to the meat industry or meat processing specifically?
Well, not necessarily, that's one of our ideas, but if you see something or know something that's in there that would be critical to ensuring our, food security, improving our long-term economic goals, something that we could do to push that forward. It'd be helpful to get your ideas just on, a few of the key issues.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Any other questions for the committee members? If not, get dressed up and we'll see you in a few minutes on the floor. Thank you very much, Abby, for.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking great questions.
Yeah, and we'll see you next week sometime, I hope.